Afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm joined on stage with Zach and Athena. I'd like to just ask you guys a quick introduction.
Sure. I'm Zach Withy. I'm the Director of Customer Marketing and Thought Leadership for Treasure Data. We are an enterprise customer data platform focused on enterprise, complex, multi-brand, multinational businesses.
Great. And I'm Athena. I'm a Senior Director at Artefact. Artefact is a data science and AI consulting firm where one of Treasure Data's partners, and I also lead our customer data ecosystem offering within Artefact.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, guys. So, without further ado, let's just jump straight into it. One of the questions, I know, Zach, we hear a lot, especially being in the CDP space, is why are there so many businesses or technologies calling themselves a CDP?
Well, I mean, if you look around here, how many people are an AI company? How many people are a data company? I think the reality is there's kind of two kind of macro effects in the market right now. One is there is still, even though we're 5, 6, 7 years into CDP being a term and kind of being an accepted technology, companies are still trying to figure out how do I go to market with customers? Where do I do with my data? The pending cookie apocalypse, it's still driving this kind of pent-up demand for better customer engagement, but there's still a lot of debate on how best to do it. Do we build it ourselves? Do we buy off the shelf? Do we just need data pipeline tools and an existing architect, put it into our existing architecture? And so as vendors, a lot of people, are like, hey, great, we're a CDP too, because it's an easy kind of, nomenclature. The reality is there's not a right CDP for everybody, but there are a lot of wrong CDPs for you. And so I think as we talk today, maybe we'll spend a little bit more time talking about kind of the right and the wrong and how to think about that. But I think it just proves that there's a market demand and there's a market opportunity for businesses because customer data is so valuable and will only get harder and more complex to manage as we progress.
Okay then, so with that being a very crowded space then around CDP, how does that change the outlook for the market?
Well, I mean, I think if you go back, 2-3 years, obviously we all went through a global pandemic and the entire digital transformation space, accelerated in most organizations and they got done in months, what would have been probably a 5 to 7 year plus roadmap. And the reality is, coming out of that, a lot of decisions that were made on the enterprise side may not have been the right decisions. They were just the decisions for the time. So we see a lot of businesses now going back and rationalizing those decisions and thinking about how they do that. And then you layer in the second level of complexity, which is as consumers, as individuals, as people, we went through that pandemic, and we really, in life you have kind of those moments, those inflection points where you change your buying behavior, you change your lifestyle. You move out and go to college, university. You get married. You have kids. You buy a home. Those are kind of like life moments that kind of make you reevaluate what brands you work with, what's important, how do you spend your money. Well, the pandemic was kind of like that for everybody at the exact same time, right? Supply chain problems forced us to reconsider, who we bought from. Lockdowns forced us to consider how we bought. People who were scared of shopping online had to get over that because there weren't a lot of other options, right? So we have people groceries delivered to their door now, and that becomes standard practice. All of this change has really just accelerated this need and this desire for digital transformation. Mm-hmm. But now, as we're coming out of this and people are like taking that collective breath and like figuring it out, I think a lot of the kind of duct tape and bubble gum that was sometimes put together during the pandemic just to get us through is now kind of showing its age. And so a lot of brands are rethinking, what does CDP mean to me? How do I use CDP? What is that opportunity?
Okay, then.
I think there's a lot to corroborate anecdotally here as well, because we've been working on very recently a number of customer data ecosystem engagements on our side, and the clients range from financial services to CPG brands, which many of you will know, as well as automotives. I think the biggest confusion I see is when you talk about customer data ecosystem, people conflate that with a CDP. So some people have a perspective that a CDP should be able to do everything and anything for your customer data. So there's an expectations management piece there. And then to Zach's earlier point, there are a number of vendors in the market who, for the sake of ease of nomenclature and not having to explain to clients where they fit into the customer data ecosystem, will call themselves a CDP. So typical example is you might be an identity resolution solution, which a CDP can often do as well, but sometimes they're very good solutions outside of the CDP space, and they will call themselves a CDP. They'll get into a customer's ecosystem, but over time, the customer is disappointed that the use case building, the activation is not happening on that platform, but that platform was not supposed to do that to begin with.
Yeah, no, completely agree. So with all that kind of misinformation out there around CDPs, what they should and shouldn't do, when businesses and business leaders are looking at digital transformation projects, especially around implementing a CDP, what are some of the key things they should look out for?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. We've been on this journey many times now. And my first question is, when a client comes to me and says, I want a CDP, can you help me find one? My first question is why? Why do you want a CDP? How do you know that you want a CDP? And not to treasure data as discredit, but maybe you don't want a CDP at all. Maybe you don't need it. And so when you embark on your CDP journey, I would always ask clients to clarify 3 questions before you onboard any vendor or partner, right? Number 1 is, what's the ROI and top-line business growth or cost efficiency you're trying to drive? What's the use case behind that, right? Yeah. If you don't have a use case, you don't know whether you need a CDP or some other tool or no tool at all. Perhaps you have what you need within your ecosystem. Usually they do need a CDP, but let's go through that exercise. Then my second question is, you've understood what you want to do. How do you plan on achieving it? So at a top level, what's your operating model? A CDP is not a tool. It's not an IT-led solution that you bring on board and then you go through your typical, SaaS-style change and adoption program and boom, it's all successful. It's not Salesforce. That's not what this is, right? You need to have a very business-led, so whether that's marketing or after sales or customer engagement teams or a combination across that funnel of ownership within your organization and how they plan on operating CDP as an environment rather than CDP as a tool. So that's kind of my second takeaway. And then the third one is, I don't like to use the word adoption when it comes to CDP. I use the word, what's your learning agenda? So when you bring on board this partner, not vendor, not tool, you brought on board a partner, what are you trying to learn? What are your hypotheses? And how are you going to enable different people in your business, right from the initial core team that does the CDP to wider teams across the enterprise, to develop their own learning agendas, the hypotheses, and test them out in this environment.
And I think the other question to ask yourself is, what can't you do today that you'd like to, right? So you have these objectives, you have these goals, you have metrics you want to hit, but what's the roadblock? What's keeping you from that? Is it time to market? Which is an efficiency conversation then. Is it data access? I mean, so there's a very different, questions that I think organizations wrestle with. And the reality is, a lot of people approached the CDP 3-4 years ago as a marketing tool. And unfortunately, in that scenario, a marketing-only tool, I should say. And in that scenario, it has become almost another data silo in a lot of organizations because they bought a data pipeline tool to move data around. That felt good. It's kind of like when you reorganize your to-do list. You feel good, like you accomplished something, but you actually didn't do any work. Data pipelines, a lot of times in many organizations, are the same problem. You're moving information around, but you're not actually moving your business forward. And so thinking about what can't you do, what's holding you back, what's a limiting factor, helps you kind of understand what are the primary use cases, and then that's how you tackle. That's where you start with from an implementation perspective.
No, yeah, brilliant. And I think, Athena, you really show the value that partnerships like yours can have to help businesses understand the true value they should be getting from the CDP. And you're completely right. It's not right for all businesses. They're at different stages in their digital transformation journey. And so you being there to say, maybe now is not the right time. Maybe you need to look at other projects and other technologies that you're currently using before you should start and embark on your CDP journey. So from looking at that views, we've kind of identified some key points the business should look at when trying to implement CDP. But what are some of the key kind of hurdles that businesses often come across when they then try to start that CDP journey?
So I think for me, the biggest hurdle is often a conflict I see between the business and IT. And possessiveness over the CDP. So typically, it's a marketeer, as you've just said, who will go for a CDP. It becomes a marketing-only tool, and you then have a huge debate with IT on should you be getting a tool on board without IT approval. It's not in our pipeline. We cannot integrate it, and that to me is a moot point. Again, it's even with the marketeers, I try to always educate them that it's not a tool. It's not a tool just for your team. It's not some sort of flow optimization thing you're bringing in to help your team. It is a concept almost. Think about it as abstract. Forget that something exists there. And that concept needs to have an organization-wide strategy across, I call it the customer journey funnel, right? So then that includes a number of teams. And ISIT are really important stakeholders because the CDP will never be successful if not obviously integrated properly. You'll be waiting for data for 20 years before anything happens, but they're not the drivers. And I think that's the biggest conflict I see.
Absolutely. I mean, enterprise-wide, customer data is valuable. It's valuable to teams outside of just core campaign marketing acquisition teams. There's customer service, there's support, there's sales, there's operations, supply chain. There's a lot of different ways data can be used. And on top of that, not only can it be used, it can be misused. So if you think about sharing data and if you got it locked down in marketing, but then supply chain needs it, and they don't have a way to get access to that data, inevitably what happens is somebody is going to email a customer file to somebody else. They shouldn't ever do that, but they will. And then you have risk, and you have this risk management problem, and you have customer data leakage. And so democratizing data is the easiest way to get over a lot of those hurdles and stop thinking of CDP as a MarTech solution only. But it is a huge driver, and there's a lot of value there. But it is an enterprise-wide value set that you can provide.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just add one point to it because you've mentioned data democratization now. Often the answer is, well, how? Data democratization doesn't mean it's a free-for-all. I'm not suggesting that open up your CDP and whoever requests access gets access to that data. One of the ways we've helped some of our clients, and we've done this together in one of our auto clients, right? Democratize data is by introducing the concept of data products. So, to give you an example, perhaps we have treasure data as a CDP, and one of the use cases we build on the CDP after all the initial data validation, ingestion, customer ID resolution, all of that's happened, and we decide to build a recommendation engine. So, the purpose of this recommendation engine is that it takes the data on treasure data, it identifies what your kind of hyper-segmented customer personas are, and then let's say when you go on this automaker's website, based on certain attributes, how long you're spending on a particular car configurator, how long are you looking at color versus accessories, there is AI ML models that will automatically recommend outcomes for you and drive you towards a particular funnel on the website. Now, that's a great solution, but if that solution is limited to just marketing in terms of its base modeling, there's only so much ROI you'll get. So the kind of operating model angle of this is you treat this recommendation engine model as a data product. That data product is then operated by marketing for the purposes of activation on the website, but equally it can be operated by after sales for activation at the dealership level, which is something marketing doesn't take care of, right? And then there's this core central CDP team which is maintaining the data product to democratize it, but it's still quite controlled. You're not giving access to all the raw data.
Okay, yeah, fantastic. So I think the real clear point there is that CDP is often thought of as a MarTech solution, but actually that is putting a limiter on it, which shouldn't be there. So when businesses are looking at CDPs, how can they future-proof that investment to make sure it's not just caveated by the marketing team and the rest of the business doesn't get to utilize it?
Yeah, so I think there's two things at play there. One is, I don't know there's any such thing as future-proofing.
Yeah.
Like, who would have guessed 6 months ago that everybody would have been talking, 8 months ago would have been talking, LLMs and AI to the extent that we are, right? 3 years ago, we would have guessed the pandemic. 6 months from now, who knows? So the idea is not to be future-proof, but to be future-ready. To have data in a centralized location with flexible tools and processes, and it's not just a technology thing, it's a team. Centers of excellence, having data dictionaries and having data tooling so that teams know what's available. Because then when that change happens and we need to react, it's not, now we've got to come up with a process, now we've got to go out and figure out how, we just need to go and execute with the tools that we have in place. So it's preparing ahead of time so that in the future, as change happens, which is inevitable, you can be more nimble to that as opposed to reactionary, which unfortunately so many brands and businesses over the last 5 years have been very reactionary in the market.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. So we've talked about some of the key areas that businesses focus on, especially when considering a CDP for implementation, and some of the kind of the big blockers. But Athena, if you were going to kind of give out one bit of advice for the audience today on those considering CDPs, where do you think what would that base of advice be?
Ooh, just one. I love
just
giving
advice.
One.
There
this
is so many we could talk about, but
just
that one key bit for everyone to take away today. What would that be?
I think the key from everything I've said is key takeaway that should stick is that CDP is not a tool. It's part of a wider customer data ecosystem. So therefore, if you start thinking about it that way, the potential and ROI you will get from a CDP will also be wider, and the business case will be easier.
Yeah, exactly.
So I won't say buy treasure data. That's not,
that is the key message today, though.
No. The reality is start with a business outcome. Start with what you want to achieve, because that will drive a lot of value early on. If you've been for those of you in the tech space or implementation who have done projects in the past where you end up with a 12-month or 24-month project where it's kind of ambiguous of what you're trying to achieve, and then all of a sudden you're said and done, and people are like, now what, right? So we absolutely push this idea of a crawl, walk, run. Pick those valuable kind of business outcomes that you can get early, 4, 6 weeks, 12 weeks in, so you're seeing value, because that's going to ultimately drive, which is the most important piece of this. Technology is great, but driving change management, getting people to use it, getting people to get value from it, and continuing to invest and learn and share and grow within the organization, because the implementation could be the best in the world of any tech. If people aren't using it and the change management doesn't happen, you're stuck, right? And so, find value quickly.
No, I completely agree. And one of the things you touched on there is how the trends change so rapidly. Like today, we are talking so much about AI, but 6-8 months ago, that wasn't even a topic. So once you're going through a CDP and you've identified why you want to implement it, you've got all the right reasons, you've got that approval and sign-off, and you're going through the process, what kind of future trends, and like I say, it's hard to predict the future, but what kind of trends could disrupt that CDP journey as they go through the implementation?
Ooh, I have a trend. I don't think it disrupts the journey, though, as long as you implement it correctly. So one of the things, everyone's going to hate me for saying this, Gen AI, there, I said it, that's the trend I'm going to talk about. But the way we think about Gen AI and CDP and customer data ecosystems is it's not a disruptor. Gen AI is often almost an enabler, unless, of course, it's taking someone's job because it's automating it. But in general, it is an enabler. And in the CDP space, what this means is CDP can still do everything it does. It continues to do the core activities. When it comes to use cases, such as things like recommendation engines or analytics you're trying to drive off the back of your CDP, Gen AI will play a pivotal role in making those analytics insights quite interactive for the business. And then secondly, when you think about your customer data ecosystem, parallel to that ecosystem is what we call your brand and content ecosystem. So translating all the useful insights from your CDE via your CDP into this like brand and content ecosystem in the form of campaigns, in the form of the right brand messaging, is somewhere Gen AI can play quite a pivotal role.
I think if there's one trend or one constant that's accelerating and will continue is the idea of consumer behavior is rapidly moving away from the idea of brands we love and are hyper engaged with are fewer and fewer and fewer. And in reality, consumers aren't always on, always off. Consumers aren't big spenders or whatever, we're starting to see that shift where segmentation is not a period of months or years. It could be weeks, right? So you may be in a cohort, in a group for a week, highly engaged, active, willing to spend, consuming all the content because you're getting ready to buy, and then as soon as you buy, you go into consumption mode and completely drop off the face of the earth. No more social, you don't open up emails anymore, because there are, you know this, we're bombarded by so many messages and so many opportunities that even the brands we love, it's hard to keep up with. So the reality is, stop thinking about your customers as like these kind of segments that are persistent, but rather as moments in time where motivations and behaviors are going to change, interests are going to wax and wane, and ultimately having tooling in place beyond just rules-driven approaches. So we talk AI a little bit, but not even Gen AI, just basic modeling of likelihood to buy, likelihood to engage, their propensity, their affinities for like putting them into the right kind of cohorting group are going to be big drivers, and let the computers do that. And I'll give you an example. We have an automotive customer who 5 years ago, the average time a person went into a dealership before they bought a car was 7 times. It is now down to 1.5 on average visits to a dealership. The rest is happening online, through text messaging, through mobile communications, digital channels. So if you ask the salesperson in that dealership how likely a customer is to buy, versus if you ask the machine learning model how likely it is to buy, and we have that exact scenario, the machine learning model is multi-x versions better at predicting that outcome. So stop asking the human in that scenario, because when you think about it from a forecasting perspective, when you think about it from a supply chain perspective, revenue modeling, if you're relying on that salesperson who only has one interaction with that customer, maybe 2, there are just so many blind spots to their data. So by using all of the data and by treating and using machines for what they're good at, which is kind of finding those patterns, we get away from this like, oh, that's the way we used to do it, or my gut tells me this segment's very valuable. Trust the data, follow that, and know that it's going to change from month to month, and you have to kind of continuously work it.
Okay, then. So I think we covered quite a few really good points today. Not all CDPs are being equal or the same, and there's a fair bit of misinformation out there. Just if one final point to cover, as Dino, as we've got you on stage, should all businesses be considered implementing a CDP?
No. The honest answer is no. I think it depends on really the sector that you're part of. I'm going to make a broad brush comment that if you're very B2C, then yes. If you're B2C banking, it's a huge white space in the banking and insurance place. Mm-hmm. But are we 100% clear on the full value the CDP will bring to that industry? Not yet. I think that's something we're still working through, particularly because of compliance and security concerns and the way banks and insurance companies operate.
Yeah, obviously a bank's going to, you have an account number, you have a relationship, there is some of those connectors already in place. Yep. Whereas a retailer, if there's no loyalty program, you're just a credit card number in a lot of scenarios. So wildly different. I think what it comes down to is how important is engaging with your customers on an ongoing basis. Like, that's the measure. If you kind of operate in a model where we have an account, they come with us, we don't engage, we don't do growth marketing, we don't do acquisition, we kind of just manage, maybe not as much. CDP may have less ROI for you. But if you are continuously trying to find new audiences, which gets harder and harder, especially as third-party cookies, as data gets more costly to do digital advertising, walled gardens become more and more of a problem, new channels pop up all the time, then yes, CDP gives you data portability. It allows you to, 2 years ago, it was, people did a lot of custom audiences on Facebook. 4 years ago, 5 years ago, custom audiences on Facebook were like, you couldn't have a conversation with a marketer without talking about a Facebook custom audience. Yeah. And now it's things like TikTok, right? And as buyer behavior changes, people's attention has moved and shifted. For some, Facebook is great, and others, it's completely out of their mix. They've completely stopped spending. So just knowing where your customers are and how important they are to you, I think is the biggest factor in how much a CDP can move the needle for your business.
Okay then, fantastic. Well, thank you very much for the discussion today. I think we've got a couple of minutes left, so in that time, Athena, any parting thoughts?
Well, I feel like I've given so many parting thoughts already.
I know,
today.
I've asked you a few times.
I'll just summarize three parting thoughts, right? So the first one I'd previously said was not a tool, it's an ecosystem play. The second one is make sure whatever decisions you're making for your customer data ecosystem are driven by a direct business ROI outcome, whether that is top-line growth or bottom-line cost efficiencies. And then third, do not underestimate the importance of the operating model you put around your CDP and CDE infrastructure.
Yeah. Okay. Zach?
I will say, and this is counterintuitive for somebody who sells CDP, you don't have to collect as much data as you think you do in a lot of scenarios. So in the past, I'm guilty of this as a marketer. The idea was, hey, let's collect everything and then figure out how we're going to use it later, right? And that's opened up the opportunity for risk and data privacy and just kind of creepy, too. So understanding what are those drivers, what are those things that really move your business forward, and being able to then start eliminating form fills and eliminating fields and data collection that you don't need, partner data sources, so that you can minimize your risk and minimize your opportunity. The CDP gives you that opportunity. And I think that's one that we don't talk about a lot, but I think that's an opportunity to build transparency and build trust with your customers by not being as weird about it. So
maybe collecting slightly less information on them because you don't need to know absolutely everything about them.
Right.
Brilliant. Well, thank you both very much for joining me on stage today, and thank you everyone for attending. If you have any questions, we'd love to answer them. But brilliant. I hope you enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you.